we've asked her along to talk about that, and also to get her views on the Cheshire Constabulary perspective and how things are looking from that side. So if you're okay, Gina, I'm going to hand over to you, and look forward to hearing what you've got.
Oh, thank you very much, Ian. And I'm sure everyone's enjoyed the session prior to mine. Mine's a lot shorter, and followed by the excellent Mankind Initiative afterwards, who I've also seen speak. So I'm sandwiched between two very good acts, so hope to meet their expectations. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here and to have been asked to present to the board and our conference today, with this particular focus on domestic abuse in the over 65. I do have a PowerPoint which I'm going to get Dawn to share for me, so you can see that. But I just thought I'd let you see me first and say hello, and then I'll talk you through Cheshire Constabulary's response, but a little bit about me and why my perspective is slightly different as a newbie, not just to this board but to Cheshire Constabulary. So Dawn, if you want to load the slides, that would be great. So this is going to be about, say, the Cheshire Police response, but I've only been in Cheshire Constabulary for 11 weeks now, having done 27 years nearly with Greater Manchester Police. I think that's given me quite an opportunity to look at Cheshire with some really fresh eyes, you know, come in with a very open mind and look at it with that new perspective, having come from a large metropolitan force. Where I was exposed to you know, very high frequency of risk and severity as well, in terms of our older communities and the abuse that they experience from their own family, their own partners, and also, you know, the stranger abuse as well, and you know, every aspect of financial abuse as we have defined under the Care Act. So can you see the slides now?
Can now, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Right, so just on that second slide there. So if I tell you where I've come from, as I say, I've been a detective for almost 24 years. I have worked in pretty much every role except for counter-terrorism, but for the latter 6 or 7 years, I've done a lot of work in the public protection arena, so children and adults, domestic abuse, and child exploitation, child criminal exploitation. So the whole range really when it comes to safeguarding our vulnerable members of the community. However, for the last couple of years I've been a DCI in South Manchester and Stockport. I've worked very closely with the Stockport safeguarding boards, adults and children, and I used to chair the domestic abuse steering group over at Stockport. I've been very involved with SAR panels, and also a lot of experience at inquests, sadly, as we know, the worst cases are those that can end up in coronial court as well as in the criminal court. And that's given me that extra experience when it comes to SARS, and also the recognition of the role of that panel. And I chair those now in Cheshire. So I chair all 4 SARS panels and the SALs, so the learning panels, as well as being an attendee at all 4 adult boards, safeguarding adults boards in Cheshire. I think what that has brought for me is that, say, I can join up the county, which gives me an opportunity to work trying to get things pan-Cheshire, which we've already discussed at our board meetings, and particularly around policies and the learning that we get from SARS, so we can address those across everybody, so that we don't have to wait till we have that experience, God forbid, in our own local authority area to benefit from that learning. You know, part of what I see as a really critical part of our role is to take that learning and have the benefit of it, just as we do with the Child Death Overview panel, which I also sit on. So it's a good place to be. I've met some wonderful partners already, and I can see that we're going to work well together and bring all of our experiences to deliver that better service. But what the thing that I've really tried to concentrate on since landing with Cheshire Constabulary is trying to get a grip of what's actually happening in Cheshire with Cheshire Police, where I see the issues and what I can do to drive that. So my current post is that of DCI in Strategic Public Protection Directorate. So I'm safeguarding DCI for all of Cheshire Constabulary. And with that comes responsibility, as I've said, for the SARS and the adults boards, but basically quality assurance and performance in all areas of public protection. So children missing from homes, domestic abuse, our harm reduction unit, which is our stalking team, adults, children, child sexual exploitation, child criminal exploitation, a really big portfolio. And I also manage the serious case review team, so very much cited on our domestic homicide reviews, our safeguarding adult reviews, and our safeguarding practice reviews for children. So I've really had to get stuck in quite quickly.
And obviously have light walls.
So we'll just come in there with the mic on. So learn about how we work in Cheshire and just get to understand our operating systems as well, because they're very different to the force that I came from. But thankfully we have a child protection audit, HMIC FRS inspection coming up in January, which has forced me to do some audit work myself, and it has actually given me that flavour for where we store information and how things work in Cheshire. So I think I'd like to say that in a short period of time, I have understood where we send our referrals to, what our relationships are like with our statutory partners and third sector and charitable sector, and how we share that information, and also where I think we need to make improvements. So if we just move on to that next slide, slide 3. Where are we now with adult at risk investigations in Cheshire, and how are those supported? So as a phrase I imagine most people have heard is that safeguarding is everybody's business, and that is something that the police officers and staff in Cheshire can be under no illusion about. You know, they do know that safeguarding is daily business, and I take it right back to the roots of when you join an organisation like this, and on our attestation ceremony when we pass out as constables and swear allegiance to the Queen. One of the things that we swear to do is, protect the public and protect life, and there are 2 key attestations. And so we can brand it as safeguarding all we like, but ultimately protecting life is what we're about. And so it's everybody's business, and it's trying to get the whole organisation to see that. So perhaps some way I can put that flesh on the bones is that the detectives that are working in public protection know that and know their statutory obligations. But I'm thinking a bit wider around the organised crime teams who go in and do warrants for, organised criminals who are trafficking people or drugs or firearms or arranging armed robberies. I used to work on a team like that, and I think back to when I was a DS in a team like that, and how I would perhaps not be cited on making those safeguarding referrals, and not think about telling social care about issues in that family, and also not even telling them that we'd gone in to do a warrant on a house that had a firearm in it. Fast forward many years, and that becomes part of, say, daily business. So I'm really trying to think wider around everybody's responsibilities and linking in with the my equivalent counterparts over a whole host of different teams, so that we can make sure we don't lose those opportunities to share information and safeguard our adults at risk when we're going into houses for the whole variety of reasons that police do go into houses. It's not always because of a domestic, and it's not always because someone's reported concern in that household. It could be something very simple as a house-to-house inquiry. And every time the police have contact with a person in the community, it's an opportunity to gather intelligence and information, and really understand where our issues are, just the same as it is for our beat officers and PCSOs. You know, we're all key in that gathering information. So the way that we support adult at risk investigations in Cheshire is there are a number of different ways. We have our referral units who are co-located with partners, generally in council buildings. They will receive what we call a vulnerable person assessment, a VPA, containing information whether about child or adult. They triage that information and then decide whether that's something that we need to share with partners. That's one way where we reach in a very direct link with our statutory partners. But also we do a lot of work on training. So our frontline officers, the probationers, I deliver training on the promotion courses for DIs and so detective inspectors and detective sergeants, as do my colleagues. We deliver ad hoc training to any team that we think may need it through doing our own dip sampling of work to see where we think people are lacking in certain areas, and we will deliver that training. We have our adults at risk policy, which we regularly flag up, and a knowledge bank on our intranet, which contains information around all key areas of adult at risk work, as well as the wider public protection world. We have a DI who is now based in each locality in Cheshire, so a safeguarding DI for Chester and Cheshire West, a safeguarding DI in the north that covers Warrington and Halton, and a safeguarding DI in Cheshire East as well. And they're all experienced in public protection and are a subject matter expert that is available to those local resources, so that they have someone to contact, because we understand that their own sergeant or inspector may not have experience of working at adults at risk or with child protection, but they now have somebody named there that they can go to, and they're there to support investigations, to offer advice, and again to deliver that local training. And my DIs also run and manage the referral units, who have a DS detective sergeant over them as well. And in doing that, and their weekly reporting to me, we get a real feel for the quality of work that comes in, the issues, and again, the training that's needed. On the whole, I think it's quite solid, but I'll come on to a later slide where there's lots of things that I think we can improve from as a force. And I think it's always very good to recognise the areas that you need to develop and be honest about it. And that way we can go ahead and address those particular areas that we need to improve in. So the specialism within Cheshire, that sits in our CID, and again, this is an area of slight concern to me. I've come from a force where we had public protection teams which dealt with adults at risk and domestic abuse and child protection, and we've only had a recent restructure in Cheshire just at the beginning of October where we sort of devolved those child protection teams, ring-fenced child protection detectives, but took out that specialism for adults at risk and domestic abuse and absorbed some of that within the CID. And the reason that I say I have some concerns around that is that we'll now have detectives who won't have had the experience of investigating adults at risk or understand the Care Act or understand the very specific offences that are related to people with mental capacity issues or in a care setting. So I'll come on to that, what I'm doing in response to that, but it does make me a little bit twitchy. So we have a plan to address that, but also that's part of the role of those safeguarding DIs. So the detectives in the CID may not have the experience, their DS or DI may not, but we've tried to cover that, and we have covered that by putting in place these safeguarding DIs as their subject matter experts, their go-to person. We've also created a strategic public protection unit who are going to be, when they're fully staffed, our audit and QA, so quality assurance team, so we can actually start to really drill down into the work that's going on in Cheshire. The first piece of work that we'll do around adults at risk will be around that understanding of mental capacity and also consent to share information. So I'll have a team that I can task with that. We can do a real deep dive into the work that we have in the force and look at where we're lacking, and also recognise the good work, which is equally important. So that setup has given me a team that I can drive to help raise standards when it comes to our adults at risk. I have reviewed the training that we deliver in our training schools, and I mentor serious cases and work quite closely with the detective superintendent in our major incident team. So, for example, when there is a real serious harm in a care home setting, I will review that investigation and support the DI that's carrying it locally. And that's very much because I've had that experience in my previous role, where I was a senior investigating officer for well in excess of 15 gross negligence manslaughter investigations in care home settings, and also care provider care neglect at a very serious level, often where we've had sadly the death of our residents in there. And I can bring that to Cheshire and support those detectives investigating those particular quite niche offences that they may not have had the support for before. So that's all a good thing when it comes to helping those that need it, and ultimately getting that right response to the family and the victim as well. So I deliver training in force and externally as well to Greater Manchester Police around Cheshire, around the care home setting investigations, the care offences, Mental Capacity Act, the Mental Health Act, Care Act, and then coronial investigations as well. And it's been really nice to do that because I do really enjoy training and watching people's faces when you deliver it and just trying to drive that enthusiasm, because I'm sure that most of the people on this call will feel the way I do, that as often adults takes a backseat to children. And yet I have seen what happens when things go very wrong, and how devastating it can be, and the risk to all of those people that may be in a care setting, or equally so a domestic homicides in the home, where there's in those over the 65, where sadly a partner's been killed by another, and the impact that has not just on the person who's committed the crime, but on the family as well, and often in some very sad circumstances where somebody's has dementia and has unfortunately committed a homicide as well. And it's bringing those cases to life and trying to imbibe in my colleagues and detectives in particular that excitement around an investigation like that. And I hope that doesn't sound unpleasant to you that are listening, but you need that drive and enthusiasm to properly look at every single avenue of an investigation and hunt down every clue. And ultimately, it's about getting that justice. So I've been really trying to bring those cases to life and excite people around them so that they realise just how good they are to work on, and also what their statutory obligations are, which is really important. So so I've had some great feedback on those. And the training I've delivered has been videoed, so it's available as a force resource for those that want to go back and watch it or have missed it. And I will continue with that as continuous professional development for our colleagues, which I think will put us in a better place going forward when we have those serious cases that do occur from time to time. In fact, since landing, I've reviewed 2 cases of that sort where there's been serious harm to adults at risk, and being able to really assist the senior investigating officer in the way that they've investigated that. So another thing that I do is every morning in Cheshire, as in most forces across the country, we have a force pace setter, usually between 8 or 8:30 when it gets started, and everybody dials into that who has responsibility for a team on that day. So inspectors, chief inspectors, and dial in, and it's chaired by the duty gold command, which will be a superintendent. And that's been a real opportunity for me to dial in every day, get people to know me, and then also raise again awareness of some of the issues that I know are there when it comes to working with adults at risk. It was great to be able to promote our National Safeguarding Adults Week, because I could mention it every day and point everybody on there to our knowledge bank, our Safeguarding Knowledge Bank on the Force intranet, and again offer myself as support, because if you don't do it regularly, it's very easy to get lost in the ether, because there are so many conflicting priorities in policing, as I know there are in many other areas of work. But it just gives that daily focus at the start of the day, and as a result of that, I've had a contact from chief inspectors, superintendents, inspectors, and any rank, to be honest, asking for advice if they're not sure about things, which has really helped, because each time you advise somebody, it puts them in a better position next time they come across a similar sort of case. So in doing the pace set, I think it's helping drive the business of adults at risk. And we also have command cards and video training as well that we have in place that are accessible for people who need them when they need them in the middle of the night. There's information on there, and I've changed the content of our knowledge bank since landing to make sure we've got everything relevant in there. I've also reviewed our adults at risk policy, and in fact we'll be bringing that to our board, so you as partners can review it and see if you're happy with the content and that, so that we're all agreed that we're heading in the right direction with it. It's a key part of how we deliver and protect those most at risk in our communities. So if we just go on to the next slide, which is slide 4, you were pleased to know there's a lot more talking than there is slides. So if you think we're only on slide 4, we haven't got very far. There's only another 4 to go, so don't worry. Okay, so this slide is about it's just to show everybody the framework that we work to. So the College of Policing sets the standards nationally across police forces and provides definitions for a whole host of things. And this is the definition that we as a police, as a constabulary, and all the other forces around England and Wales, not Northern Ireland, but England, Wales and Scotland, we work to this definition of vulnerability. So as you can see and read for yourself, I often try and simplify it for staff when doing training, but it is just someone who can't protect themselves, and that could be in a whole host of different areas and maybe very capable in others. So I always try and explain within the context of this definition. We talk a little bit about fluctuating capacity and capacity assessments, and when I deliver the training we discuss how that affects policing every day. And I'll just come on to that around capacity and fluctuation capacity. Obviously no medical expert, but I think about the people that we come across on a Friday and Saturday night maybe, who are absolutely legless or lying in the street, and by talking to police officers around understanding capacity to someone to process information, you can liken it to the very drunk person who at that particular time cannot process information and couldn't repeat back to you what they've heard. Just as we make those assessments when we book people into custody, where we check their understanding of their rights and entitlements and their legal protection, all of these things are daily business in policing. And so I want the daily business of knowing whether an adult at risk understands you to feel as familiar as it would as if you were stop searching somebody, booking them into custody, or trying to get them home safely on a Saturday night. If you just come on to slide 5. So this is to give you a little flavour of the volume of work that sits in Cheshire and what that actually means to us here at Chester and Cheshire West. So last year, or rather year to date, so this is this year's figures. I got these figures together about a week or so ago, so these are really current. They'll only be a week out of date. We've had nearly 17,500 vulnerable person assessments. So they are a form that's filled in by any officer that goes to any incident where they feel there is information to share with our partners. So any domestic abuse incident would create a VPA, anything where we think there's a child at risk, and equally so if we thought there was an adult at risk. They would fill in a whole host of questions, some of which are free text, some of which are yes, no, which helps them then decide on a risk rating for that particular individual. And then it's triaged in our referral units, and the right information should be shared with the right authority or partner. So for us at Chester and Cheshire West as a whole, it's over 3,000 VPAs to date this year, but of those almost 2,000, and I thought this was quite surprising, almost 2,000 are adults at risk. So that leaves only just 1,300 that are children. So 2/3 of the work involves adults at risk as opposed to children, and that's an average of, say, 180 a month. So these VPAs, I'll call them just the shortened version, but you'll know that I'm referring to these our referral documents, is what our information sharing documents. They are so important to get right, because that is the basis on which we decide whether to share information and whether it meets the criteria to share information with adult social care. And it must involve a risk assessment. It must involve all of the guidance under the Care Act. It needs to include reference to the areas of abuse as defined under the Care Act. It needs to cover consent to share, capacity, family setup, that override it, when and why we can override the consent to share and share anyway. And so I need a real thorough understanding of that so that we can make sure the quality of information, which ultimately helps protect people, is thorough and relevant. So some really great work that I've managed to achieve since landing is getting our VPA queues reduced drastically. So when I first landed, and I know this is stats, and stats can be a little bit boring, but at the end of this, at the end of every referral piece of paper or e-document is a person. And if you see it like that, we understand why triaging and sharing information quickly is critically important, so that we can get the right support in place for people that need it the most. So we went from having almost 500 open VPAs in our queues. I started working on this about 2 weeks into my role, and 3 weeks ago we got those queues down to 0, which meant we had no documents to triage at all, which is absolutely amazing, and the Chief Constable says has never happened. So I feel that's a real positive for us here, Chester and Cheshire West. That meant that we nothing was waiting long, things were looked at quickly, things were assessed and triaged quickly, and ultimately those that needed information sharing was shared quickly. And we all know that time, the criticality of time and how important it is. We tell people as soon as we can, so we can get those wheels in motion to help those that need it. So I was really pleased with that. And that scrutiny continues for me daily at Pacesetter. And weekly, every week, I have conversations with my DIs around the figures, and then daily I look at those figures so we can see where we need to rejig resources, where we need to put them so that we can keep driving that those queues down, and as I say, at the end of it, making sure that we're sharing this information. So we've identified VPA champions and adults at risk champions. They're going to receive some enhanced training so that they can slot in alongside colleagues and support them. And help them with their identify and deal with any knowledge gaps. We need to do more audit work around the quality of the work that comes in on the VPAs. As I say, I've got a team that I hope to set up soon on this particular piece of work. And again, now we'll get them to look at care needs, consent, capacity, family setup, share, overriding consent. So we can comment on that and then take those areas of learning out to whoever it is that needs them, whether it's an individual or a team or a whole unit. We will deliver that. So I reviewed a case quite recently involving a 70-year-old plus couple, which just highlights our topic today around domestic abuse and how difficult it is or can be to help people. So I think there's a real challenge when we have an elderly couple who have perhaps had a very long history of abuse within the relationship, aside from the cultural issues of perhaps from a generation where women were maybe more dependent on men, the difficulties of leaving a long established relationship when you're financially dependent and maybe frail. It becomes even harder, I think, to get that traction and help that couple, and often they won't share information either themselves. So the case I looked at, and again this was just through the audit work, was a couple who were self-neglecting through their alcohol abuse, therefore meant that there was more domestic abuse, so physically frail because of their alcohol abuse, and codependent. And it was a case that had gone many a time to MARIC, which is our multi-agency risk meeting for domestic abuse cases, where high-risk cases are heard. So this couple have been recognised as being a high-risk couple. They had over 60 incidents in the last couple of years where police had been called because of abuse in that relationship, or one of the partners calling us for help, and both were equally abusive of each other. And MARIC didn't seem to solve that problem. We kept referring, but it wasn't enough. So when I reviewed it, it was a great opportunity, and I spoke to Sarah Martin about it, one of our board members, because it needed a different push and a different take on it, and so a high risk meeting was called for that. And I think it's bringing that experience and that fresh pair of eyes that can help give people those tools to try something different. Because if Marek wasn't working, if our multi-agency domestic abuse group wasn't working, then we needed to try something else. So I'm bringing the right partners. So that's the kind of thing that we can bring as we start looking at what's in those cues. Say they're not just figures. There's real information in there that we can work with. So just moving on to slide 6. So the challenges that I see, having looked at in detail at cases in Cheshire, and particularly the information that we're sharing, we still use vulnerable adults as a phrase as opposed to adults at risk. It's very entrenched in policing, so I need to try and book that so that we're up to speed with the Care Act, which after all came in the Act was written in 2014. So raising awareness of use of language, definitely avoiding victim blaming, which I do see, and I think probably down to lack of training, is the frustrations that I've seen expressed around people who self-neglect, who are alcoholics, who hoard or are homeless. It's almost like they blame that person for being in that situation and maybe don't look wider in that situation and what's happened in their life to get them there. So there's quite a lot of training that's been threaded through all of the probationary training, again around adverse childhood experiences, but that wider response to not victim blame, but to try and look for those solutions. And looking at the complexities in domestic abuse in the over 65s, say codependent, lengthy relationships, that cultural lack of awareness, to the financial dependence and fear, and how we really need to push some of the police understanding of that and look a bit wider. So I'm trying to encourage people to do house to house, because it'd be neighbours are a vast source of information, but if we don't knock on and ask people, we'll never know it, and we can deal in isolation with incidents, just going to that house and dealing with that couple without really trying to find out what's going on. The same as the man in the corner shop who sees them every day and may know an awful lot more about that couple than we will establish by just going into the home and speaking to them. So it's trying to push things like that as well. And then say that understanding of capacity, that's a really key part of training to the police officers here in Cheshire, and when we can override it. And that fits in very neatly with the revised adults at risk policy, which as I'll be sharing with all the 4 local boards, so we can agree that they're right and fit for purpose. And then how we share that risk, so through things like when I was at Stockport, we'd call it MARS, so multi-agency adults at risk meeting, a high risk meeting, or a MARAM as it is at Warrington, and when we can use those. And then what I can say is there's been a lot of success in Cheshire when it came to promoting the fire service. So in our neglect cases, in our sort of hoarding cases, at one time we wouldn't have shared information with the fire service, and then sadly we've seen many a fatal arson. So I know that we can build on the success of teaching officers to think of the fire service and the fire safety risk assessment. So if we can do that with capacity, we can do that with consent to share, and we can do that with the quality of the information that they put on their risk assessments. We do have a young workforce. We have got a national shortage of detectives, and there is that increase in demand, which I think every public sector has seen, and particularly made worse with COVID. So understanding those challenges just means that is a better way of trying to solve them, because we know what context they're in. So that's the challenges I think in Cheshire. I definitely think they're achievable to improve. And as I say, just reducing those queues was a really big achievement in a short space of time, and we'll continue to push that. So if we just go on to slide 7, and we're pleased to know this is the last one in writing, because I've just gone 5 minutes over. Some of the things that we are working on is a electronic pocket notebook with our VPA form on there with mandatory fields, which means that when the officer is there at it, they do it, and it's a prompt on their pocket notebook when they're updating the incident, which cuts out human error, because they have to do it because they can't move on the electronic system without doing it. And I like things that puts blockers in place so that it's a forced part, and then anything that's been forced becomes entrenched and just becomes habit. And what we want is this is a habit for people that are going into cases where we need to recognise adults at risk. Doing that face-to-face support and adults at risk clinics, which we're launching next year. So I've touched a lot on the train, and I see that's been really key. But it's bringing them to life and bringing excitement to people, so they realise what they can really do and the benefits to it. We have a comms plan, so use of the intranet, 7-minute and 2-minute briefings, and also, as I've said, our knowledge bank, which I push every week at Pacesetter, and often several times a week. And then I really want to recognise the good work, so that those that are doing it get that appreciation, and hopefully are then identified so they can work alongside and help colleagues that need that support. I'm teaching on the senior investigator officers training, and as I say, the adults at risk toolkit has been revamped. And then a couple of other things that really fit in around the DA theme with the over 65s is Cut It Out, which was a campaign launched in South Stockport, which some of you may well have heard of. Came from Canada, where hairdressers were trained to recognise signs of domestic abuse, because often hair loss or hair pulling can be one of those physical signs. And also, we know that we talk to our hairdressers. I've had the same hairdresser, I hate to say this, for 30 years, which makes me feel quite old. And I open up to him, Wayne, lovely Wayne, and you form that relationship with your hairdresser, and people talk to the hairdressers. And I think sometimes because they're seeing them in a mirror rather than looking them face to face. So that means going into colleges, training the trainee hairdressers, training the trainee nail technicians, everybody that has that hands-on beauty treatment, to start asking those probing questions, or recognising signs of physical abuse, and knowing what to do with it when somebody discloses it to them. And the other great thing about Cut It Out is that ethnic hairdressers can be quite specific to a type of ethnic hair, and so that means we can reach other communities that we may have struggled to at one time, and again training them so that we deliver that. So that's something that I'm probably going to start doing at Cheshire East initially, and then looking again at how we do that across the force. And the same with the Mankind Initiative. I imagine you'll have heard of this, but the Lions Barber Collective, who do that training with barbers to particularly support men and men who are victims of domestic abuse. And then there'll be very shortly the refresh and relaunch of our Adults at Risk toolkit. So they're all the plans I've got ongoing. Apologies, I've run over, but I know I started a bit early. So I hope that's given you a little flash through of what's going on in Cheshire. Lots of good work, lots of things to improve on, but we'll get there, especially jointly when I do it with the partners. So thank you very much. And the last slide, is there any questions?
Thanks, Gina. That was really comprehensive and